All right, so a few more shadows on this side, and then we will get into the rendering. You see, these aren't all in the exact place they should be. I'm kind of perceiving that, light is bouncing around this scene pretty well, so it doesn't need to all be uniformly lit, I guess, since there's definitely more than one light source. It's just like when you move multiple lights around the scene, you'll actually get multiple shadows. You'll generally have, or you'll probably always have, one predominant light source, and therefore some stronger shadows off the one, but you can get multiple shadows. So I could say, well, maybe there's a pretty strong light source hitting the front of the screen and even casting a shadow on this next piece right there, and still another shadow down here. Now, to be correct, I would probably have to make one of these a halftone, but I'm actually just going to go with what I think visually looks cool. So I just think that, I don't know, that propels those and pushes them off the surface. I don't want this to appear flat and uninteresting, so. Again, we can drop in some little textures back here, tiny little details that really don't have to read too specifically. That's kind of the beauty of texture. It's just good to put in there. And even if it's not as concise of a concept, it might still do the trick. Like for instance, if these were just, I think as long as they're basically lines and maybe even dots or small circles, then it's going to read as something that belongs in this scene. So I don't mean just to scribble in the background, unless, try it. If it looks good, then roll with it. Okay, so I think that's majority of the shadows there. I guess we could put another one right here. Makes sense because we're closer to the edge of the scene. We want some pretty strong contrast right up here. So I'll probably add some shading up here. Like that. Again, I think it looks a bit more like it would be in focus, like you can see everything that's going on here. So as things get closer to the camera, they should read more effectively. All right, so let's go over here now. Same thing. And you see here, I'm just drawing them in this time. I'm not worrying about going back with a translucent pen. If I make any horrendous mistakes, I'll do that. But if you haven't noticed by watching these lessons, I bounce around a bit, and I think it keeps me interested in the way that I'm creating. And a lot of times I try to do things by hand as much as possible, but I will bounce back and forth from what I consider doing it by hand to using the digital methods before me. I don't know what it is. I think I just get a little bit bored if I do everything the exact same way. And again, like I've probably said multiple times, the variation adds to the flavor for me. So if everything's rendered the exact same way, like if I was to use that shift click method all the way through this entire illustration, I probably wouldn't like it, me personally anyways. It would probably be a lot more concise, and the perspective would be a lot more correct, but it would be more boring to me. So that's why I kind of mix things up, where I do some of it by a bit more freehand, and some of it with the tools afforded to us in this digital program. Okay, so now let's see if there's any areas I can embellish upon. Well, let's do this. Let's pan back a bit. And again, we want to always check it by toggling the visibility off. And then also, let's toggle the visibility off the addition. So I can see the areas I missed because the blue stands right out now. So let's just do that. And I also feel like the left side still needs more, mainly in the area of line weight. So from back here, the thing I'm seeing the most is that this area up here really needs to be separated from the top edge. You can see it more apparently over there, and even over there it could use some more, but it definitely needs it over here. In fact, just think about this. You could actually go around each of these main screens and add a heftier line, and it's going to read a lot better. Now, one of the reasons for that, and I plan on talking about this a little bit more when we did the characters, is you generally want to use your heaviest line weight around the edge of any primary things like characters or again, a focal point, whatever. But in this case, this this techie kind of stuff or whatever, you know, screens, and it's all going to read better if there's a heavier line on the outside and then thinner lines on the inside. So that works in a lot of different areas. So the main thing is that we make sure to have that, again, on kind of the bigger screens, because that's going to push them forward, and it's going to make them, you're kind of giving a hierarchy to the way things read in the scene by doing that. This works really well with foreshortening, so whenever you're doing a foreshortened character or, you know, weapon or whatever it is, you have to make sure to really put a nice heavy line around that thing that's coming out towards camera. So again, if you want the smaller details to read as being smaller, then put that heftier line around the you know, the larger, more imposing shapes. And I think it's, you know, you have to play around with doing it from a distance as well, because it's easy to get too close to this and then it just doesn't work. Like you keep zooming in and zooming back out. It's like the double-edged sword of working digitally, that it's, you can zoom in too much, and you really need to read this information from a distance. But then what tends to happen is you're a little shakier, or your you know, your quality of line is going to vary because you're going to be further back from the scene. You're not going to have the same control. But that's all right. I think control is overrated for a lot of this stuff. You got to really just have fun with it. There's so many ways you could fix it at the end anyways, that you got to kind of let go of that idea of control in the beginning. Sometimes messy is good. I don't want to put a inset shadow on all these, but I just feel like it needs it, so I'm going to go ahead and go with it. Also, I need to rotate this because I keep getting a skipped line off to the edge, and generally that's because I need to rotate this to be in the most comfortable position for drawing this line. Just like that. Okay, so now let's pan back, check that one more time. I've got a few spots over here. And again, something like this, I'm going to add a nice heavy line around this screen that's closer. So I really want this to feel like it's popping off the page a bit more. And you can actually go pretty extreme with this effect. Oftentimes I'll look at other work that I admire and I'll pay attention to how thick they made some of those lines as they come towards camera. And some of them are just massive by comparison. So they have these tiny little thin lines towards areas back here, back in the distance, and then just this huge line around some object up close, and that's what makes it work. That's what gives it this kind of illusion of foreshortening or perspective. And it also doesn't have to be traced around everything, so play around with that concept of, like for instance on this one, I'm just going to put it thicker on this top corner. So I'm going to put a thick line there, and then a tapered line right there. And then same thing here, I'll put a thicker line here, but have it taper and blend in to that perspective line basically. And just little things like that, just play around with different ways of implementing this effect. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we'll drop our line work back in. And we're going to head over to the next lesson and we're going to add some rendering. So a little bit of this cross hatching and detail work, shading work. So with that, let's move on to our next lesson.